We're here having a conversation with Lamar Slay, and we're talking about capital campaigns. So what is, if in your experience, what is one of the main reasons why they don't work, why capital campaigns fail?
Yeah. And there are a lot of failures out there. You don't ever see that on anybody's publicity as far as consultants go, but there are a lot of failures. I think the biggest failure is because the DNA of the church doesn't match the DNA of the campaign. And there are a lot of great companies out there that help you with capital campaigns. Some of them have a canned approach. It's going to be the same strategy, same everything, whether it's a church of 500 or church of 5,000. And that canned process just doesn't work. You need to sit down with whoever's going to lead your campaign and design the campaign where it fits the DNA of your church. You don't want folks in the congregation to think, well, this is something somebody else brought in and they're forcing on us. You want them to believe this was something that was designed by our staff, by our leadership. It fits us. It's like what we normally do, except it's much, much bigger than what we normally do. Because lots of times that canned approach works great in some churches. But in a lot of churches, it doesn't, because it's just not them. And people are turned off by that. You never get an opportunity to cast the vision because the people have already put their hand up, or they've said, wait, this isn't us. This doesn't feel like us. So that DNA is vital.
So give me an example there of, you say, what would fit the DNA of a church. I think if you had a spirit-filled experience, would that mean there'd be a little more connection to this is what God's saying versus vision? So give me a little examples there.
A lot of it has to do with a pastor, because when a pastor's at a church, after a pretty short period of time, that church is going to take on the personality of that pastor. And so let's say that your worship is very reserved. You're in a church that maybe not necessarily a spirit-filled church, a church that has other beliefs but still is an evangelical church, and their worship is pretty tame. And if you all of a sudden in a capital campaign, the worship totally changes. And maybe your church is used to doing hymns, and all of a sudden in a campaign, the consultant tells you, hey, let's do some praise courses. Let's have a little free worship. People are going, wait, what is this? The same way, I believe very strongly that the pastor is a shepherd. The sheep hear his voice. So if a campaign happens and you bring in outside speakers to speak for that campaign, they're not hearing their shepherd. And people are not going to respond to it. So it needs to be that leadership leading like they normally lead. And that becomes an issue because there are times when a leadership doesn't cast vision and they don't really work hard at reaching people. They're kind of comfortable. All of a sudden a campaign comes along and they really have to get it in gear, and all of a sudden it's hard work, and people just, they recognize that. They go, hey, this isn't us. It's not going to work.
So if I'm reaching out for a capital campaign to a company, what would be some red flags for me as a pastor if I started hearing certain things from a consultant? What would be red flags?
That's a great question. I think one of the first things that I would do as a pastor, if I were going to have a capital campaign and I contacted a company, I would make it real clear to them that I didn't want a salesperson making the presentation for their company. I wanted the consultant, the man or the woman that was actually going to work with my church. I wanted them to be there with my leadership so we would get to know them. Oftentimes, in some of the larger companies, you don't meet the consultant until he or she is there for the first meeting. And that's the kiss of death. Because if you don't connect with that person, if your leadership don't connect with that person, then they're not going to connect with the campaign. So that's real important.
I love that. That's so good. So are there any other reasons you could think about why a capital campaign would not work, not get off the ground, not be effective?
I think poor timing. If in the life of the church, the timing is not right, then that can be a major problem. For example, if you're not real sure what you're going to build or what you're going to buy, you don't have to have all the details, but you need a general idea. Hey, we're going to build a new worship center. Well, if you jump the gun and have a campaign before you make that decision, then people don't know what they're giving to. And while they're giving to the vision, they want to know how the money's going to be spent. You know, you cast vision, but you also have to present cost and what the project's going to be, how long it's going to take, what it's going to do for the congregation. So if you're not ready to do that, then you can jump the gun. It's not good. Typically, the summer is not a good time to do a campaign because people are in and out. They don't hear the messages. We challenge folks when we kick off a campaign, hey, we want to challenge you for the next 6 weeks, be here. Don't miss a week. You're going to miss something really big if you do. Make that commitment. Typically, that's not how often people come to church in a row.
Right.
It's a couple of times a month. But in a campaign, you have an opportunity to challenge them to do that. And so make sure the time is right.
That makes me think, though, if you say it's not good in the summertime, when would you suggest is the best time for timing?
Typically, either prior to Easter, so you finish up before Easter, or you start in August when school starts.
Gotcha.
Or probably the most popular time in the fall is the Sunday after Labor Day, because that allows you to finish up prior to the holidays. The latest you want a campaign to go in the fall is to end right before Thanksgiving. You don't want to get Thanksgiving in the middle because people are scattered, that sort of thing. So that timing is real important. I did have one church that we started in the summer because the summer was their highest attendance time all year. I've never seen that anywhere else, but for them, it worked, and it worked great.
Yeah, that's great. And so what about things, I can imagine if you're processing with a church that they've had failures in the past or stuff that hadn't worked in the past, but it hadn't been addressed. Would that be another reason why people don't trust the campaign? Or have you?
Big time.
Okay.
I worked with a church, and on a commitment Sunday, not a single senior adult turned in a commitment card. It was weird, not a single one. So I asked the pastor, I said, why do you think that is? He says, we've tried to do this 3 times and it didn't work. And so as I got into that, one of the times they were going to build a family life center and a worship center, and they didn't get enough money to do both, so they built the family life center. Well, the senior adults began to not trust them. So in that particular case, I told the pastor, I said, okay, we've got to prove to the senior adults we're going to build this worship center. Told him to get a bulldozer and dig the basement. And so he got a bulldozer, came, dug the basement, and the next Sunday, the senior adults began to turn in their commitment cards.
Wow.
If you've had past failures, you've got to address those. You've got to deal with those. I would have told him, have a meeting with your senior adults, ask their forgiveness for not doing what you said you would do the last time, and cast vision of what we're going to do this time. You deal with it up front. Another is just poor execution. A lot of churches try to do it themselves. Normally, a church doesn't have a staff member with enough extra time on his hands to lead his capital campaign.
Yeah, sure.
Normally, a church doesn't have people on staff that have been through previous campaigns and have an idea of what to do. Poor execution of the standard of leadership. You don't get the right leaders, lay leaders, in leading the different teams that are approached. So a lot of those things, churches try to take shortcuts. Well, our people are different. We don't need to do that publicity. Later, well, it would have been good had we done that publicity. So, and I think the last thing is just unrealistic expectations. If you've got like we talked about earlier, $500,000 budget, and you're expecting $10 million to come in, your expectations are not realistic. So it's really important that those expectations that you share with your congregation, that you cast in the vision, they're realistic, and realistic with God stepping in and doing his work.